Hello and welcome to Now in Zen, the podcast about microtonal and xenharmonic music, both national and international, foreign and domestic, past, present, and future. For JI purists, computer geeks, alternative guitarists, and academic aficionados of all ages from age 8 to 81/64, I'm Stephen Weigel.
And I'm Sevish.
And this is Now in Zen. So today, episode 1/1, we are talking about how xenharmonics or different tuning systems can be implemented on instruments and or synthesizers, and what tunings you might want to use if you're just getting into the whole thing. So I guess for now, we could start by talking about ways that 12 equal acoustic instruments can play xenharmonics. I don't know if you have any experience with that, Sevish. As an electronic musician, do you modify acoustic instruments at all or use them to play microtones?
I don't, but I do have a small collection of random instruments. One of them that I do have is a kalimba, so you can obviously retune that. You got kalimba too? Yeah, that's cool. Man, I really love it. It sounds good. My kalimba smells really nice. I don't know why. It's just like the best smell in the world. But a few years ago when I first got it, I tuned it up to mavila, one of the mavilas. I think it was a 7-note mavila. I think you need to go up to 8 or higher than that to really get the whole flavor of the thing. But yeah, it sounds great. It sounds really good.
That's awesome.
On that instrument.
The things you said remind me of a lot of other microtonalists. I think it's really common for us as a demographic to have lots of instruments with little odds and ends. Like, I immediately think of Jacob Barton's Utterbots or wine glasses or kalimbas. In fact, Aaron Johnson, the head of Un12, he has a piece that he plays where he's tuned his kalimba to mavila as well. For those of you who don't know what mavila tuning is, commonly it's described as a 7-note scale with 2 large steps and 5 small steps. So kind of like the reverse of the diatonic scale. But of course you can add as many notes as you want. It's just that 7 is nice for a kalimba because of where your hands are. So
yeah, the design of the kalimba really does seem it's geared towards 7-note scales, isn't it? And there's the whole alternating left and right notes. So when you're playing with your left and right thumbs, you can strike chords by rolling your thumb on one side. It's a pretty cool design. The limitation there, I feel, is I can't chuck a 9-note scale on it. Or maybe I could, actually. I should give that a go. But it really hurts your fingers trying to move those little tines about. So yeah. I haven't retuned mine that often. I really should do. But they can keep tuning quite well. Yeah,
that's another issue that often gets brought up, is how well your homemade instruments can keep their tuning. Because if stringed instruments, say, that are like poorly designed or old, are susceptible to slippage and creep, then that's usually not good. But a kalimba does a really good job keeping the tuning. Another instrument I've worked with that actually reminds me of this is the hammered dulcimer.
Oh, cool.
That's another really good choice for experimenting with alternative tunings. I've seen Juhani Norvala, I think that's how you pronounce his name. He's a wonderful Finnish composer who plays some things on the cantel occasionally, which I think is like a Finnish instrument that's similar to a dulcimer. But on the hammered dulcimer, it's like you've got a percussion instrument, and the hammered dulcimer is like the kalimba where it's built to play a 7-note scale. So if you tune a scale with 7 notes, that's going to fit in with sort of the design that's already there. Because, as you all know, probably, the diatonic scale has 7 notes. So, of course, that's what it's designed around. But with the dulcimer, you can add more notes. It's just that it's harder for the instrument to stay in tune because it's not used to having that extra leeway in the higher range. So that's something that I used when I was a student of composition.
Right. So that problem you just mentioned, what's that due to? Is it a different tension in the strings or something, that it's designed for a different kind of tuning? So
yeah, it's a tension thing.
Okay.
It's similar to how like a piano sort of remembers how it's been tuned, and if you tune it differently, it doesn't want to behave for a while. It has to like really sort of get used to it after a long time. And the dulcimer is sort of like a microcosm of that, I guess, because the strings aren't as intense and there's not nearly as much pressure on a hammered dulcimer. But It definitely doesn't want to be retuned to anything bizarre. I remember when I would tune it, I would have to sort of sit down and tune it and then budget like an extra 30 minutes to maybe tune it twice or 3 times before something was starting. If I was tuning it like really microtonal or weird, the more weirdly I was tuning it, the more time I would have to spend. So yeah.
Okay. But after a few retunings, did it eventually kind of stick there, or?
Yeah, it did. Even if not perfectly. There was a piece I played in the XenHarmonic New Music Showcase. That was a concert I put on at Ball State my last year, where I played a dulcimer that was in eighth tones. And the scale had been generated from letters of a phrase. So it was not like a moment of symmetry like a lot of microtonals used to. It was very, very irregular. Probably one of the most irregular scales I've ever had the pleasure of working with. There were like 2 quarter tones in a row. And it was kind of like a harmonic minor scale with that, and then a few other little deviations here and there. And so that was a 9-note scale. What would happen is the dulcimer would kind of rest there, but then it would slip out of its tuning more readily than the diatonic tunings or 7-note tunings.
Okay.
So,
yeah. These problems that crop up with the dulcimer, with the piano, you can really see why some brave souls have taken to designing their own instruments and building their own instruments purely to explore these new tonalities.
Yeah, absolutely.
Folks like Kraig Grady.
Yes, yeah.
So many beautiful instruments. Those massive bars. Is that the bars of Mount Meru and?
Yes. They're amazing.
He plays dulcimer as well, right?
I believe so,
Pretty
although
sure
I
I've
haven't
heard
really...
some recordings.
I haven't investigated all of his instruments, but that's something I should do. It's kind of like a Harry Partch thing, where,
Right, yeah, Partch is the classic example, right?
Yeah. I don't know if a lot of people know that there are a lot of, I guess, Harry Partches today, if that makes any sense, or at least there are composers who decide, well, I'd like to play in microtonal tunings, and so I'm going to make my own real instruments to make that a reality. Another instrument that people make a lot, or at least a really common one, we could talk about this and then maybe talk about, like concert instruments. Guitars.
Okay.
Guitars. They're so important, not only because they are really popular, if you're in a band, you have a guitar player, a bass player, a drummer, and a singer, and maybe a keyboardist. Those are kind of the essential ingredients. But there are some guitar players who don't read music. I actually have a video about this on YouTube, why making microtonal guitars is a really good way to get people interested, because then they just see the tablature and they can experience it for themselves, and they don't have to dig really deep into music theory to learn new tablature. They just have to sort of feel their way around a new instrument. Personally, I have a 19-tone guitar. I'm fortunate enough to have an uncle who's very into guitar making and woodworking, so we did that as a project together a few years ago.
Hey, nice.
So that's what I've got, yeah. And I know that like lots of other people have guitars that are either fretted differently or they can remove or rearrange the frets. Like 22 equal guitars are pretty common, as are 17, 15. So that's pretty interesting stuff. Yeah, and with the guitar instruments, it's funny because in addition to putting frets on a guitar or taking away all the frets, you can also take 12 equal guitars and modify them a little bit. You can either retune the strings to get within the cracks and then play on frets in tunings that have shared material with 12-tone equal temperament. Like, you could do quarter tones, or you could do 18-tone equal temperament because it has a whole tone scale. And then another way to do that would be to modify the bridge. You can actually put things under the bridge to raise the string height and get different tunings that way, but that's kind of a whole can of worms compared to the frets and fretless sort of things, so I think I'll just leave that there for now. We might talk about that in future episodes. Do you ever investigate those kinds of guitars? Have you seen anything really unusual there?
Yeah, I've seen some unusual stuff. Just recently in the Xen Harmonic Alliance group on Facebook, I saw the one that Ron Sword posted.
One!
It's this big old wooden thing, and the way the frets, the wiggly frets, it reminds me of like a tiger skin, like a tiger's fur, right?
Yeah.
They're bending all over the place, but actually it's a just intonation guitar. Now, I'm sure it was difficult to for him to get his head around that, and then to build the thing in the first place. Seriously, you need, if you haven't seen this, you need to
Yes.
You need to go searching on the Xen Harmonic Alliance group, or just search for Ron Sword guitars, something like that, and you will see this one with the bendingest frets you've ever seen.
Yeah, I think
it's scary, but it's
kind of
cool.
like, yeah, definitely. It's like one of the most viral microtonal guitar images, you know, because you see it and it just looks so insane because the frets are so curvy. Like, it doesn't even really look like a fretboard. That's how like curvy looking the frets look. It kind of looks like someone drew some continuous lines on a guitar neck, and the neck is so thick. I did see a video of somebody playing it really well, but I couldn't really tell it was JI from that video because they were kind of shredding. But yeah, that's a really awesome example. One of my favorite guitars. Togehan Cholu also creates microtonal guitars because he has rearrangeable frets, like John Schneider, who works with Harry Partch's music a lot, and he's been on a few podcasts as well. At least I think he was on a podcast about Irv Wilson back a few years ago when Irv had just passed away. So I listened to that as well. So there are a lot of microtonal guitars out there, even if you don't want to go fretless. Because, you know, there are a variety of approaches. You can have fretless guitars, or maybe an oud. That's a really common fretless instrument because it sounds more amplified fretless than an acoustic guitar. Or, of course, you can have fixed frets and or rearrangeable frets.
Right, so would there be any positives or negatives to going either of those routes?
Yes, that's a really good question. And I'm sure lots of guitar players can answer this better than me, so you gotta follow the podcast and chime in, guitar players. There's your incentive to fix whatever I'm about to say. What I do know is fretless guitars are harder to play for two reasons. The first reason we've touched upon is usually amplification is a lot lower, so it's harder to get the sound to project on a fretless guitar. You can fix that with like a resophonic guitar that has a slide, although that's not the same as playing a fretless guitar. And secondly, of course, you have to aim and be good at finding the pitches, which isn't really as hard as one would make it seem, but it depends on the tuning system, of course. If you have a lot of notes and you have to aim really precisely, or if something is really, really xenharmonic and you keep missing it, those are going to be harder than, say, like 17-tone equal temperament or something. So, you know, yeah, that's kind of a situation there.
Yeah, it's relying on your ear, isn't it? Even for a scale that's not too xenharmonic, too crazy, there's still the effort involved in accurately hitting those pitches. And not falling into familiar patterns that you've learned. Whereas with a fixed pitch instrument, you can kind of play the pitch. You know, for example, if any keyed instruments, you can pretty much just push the key and you hear the pitch, so that there's no ear involved almost.
Yeah.
At least in accurately, you know, given that intonation, you don't need to use your ear.
Right, yeah. And the best part is this kind of dilemma really describes the whole of most instruments, fixed pitch versus free pitch. Because on free pitch instruments, you have the advantage of being able to go wherever you want and not having to like manually change the pitch system in some difficult way, like changing the frets out, or in the case of like my pink Halberstadt keyboard, which if you haven't seen, you should check out all my videos. It's a Korg IS50 where I took out the keys and rearranged them and spliced them with some extra keys I got from the Ball State Studio when they threw one of their keyboards out. So using that, I can rearrange it to a lot of equal temperaments I like. So the advantage there, of course, is you can play the discrete pitches, but you also have to do the work of rearranging it if you want to use something like fixed frets. So yeah, that's why pianos and guitars are pretty interesting, because you often have to make that choice with guitars, and then with pianos, it's always fixed pitch. So, yeah. I was thinking maybe we could talk briefly about like instruments that are used for like orchestra, symphony band, stuff like that before we move on to synthesizers, if that's fine.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a huge expert at all of these instruments, but as a composer, I generally know the ranges and the properties of said instruments. and there are a variety of approaches. If you have woodwind instruments, usually you're going to be able to generate quite a lot of microtones because the chromatic fingerings on a woodwind instrument, there are so many versions of them and, alternative ways to play notes that you can combine them in different ways to make a lot of microtones. Most of the microtones you could ever want. And this is especially true in the higher range, which kind of makes sense with our physical understanding of pitch, right? Where like higher pitches can be more easily distinguished and we can be more accurate with sense differences. Woodwinds also play higher pitches more microtonally precisely. So there's that. I think it's a lot harder for brass instruments having to bend the pitch or to sort of create new harmonics and work around that. That's a lot harder, but I know that people have built like concert trumpets that have an extra valve or quarter tone trumpets. I think Casey Hale may have used a 19 equal trumpet at some point, and I know that Microtonal Records has some of that too. So that's definitely something to look into. I think that's strings sort of go without saying. They're kind of a fretless instrument, but aiming can be really tough, just like on a fretless guitar. However, with strings, you'll have more amplification. So, I mean, I think that really just kind of like, in terms of most concert instruments, we've just about covered it. The point is, almost all instruments can play microtonally. It's just that you should know the parameters and what that will do to the instrument and or how easy it is to switch tunings, things like that. So generally, I try to write microtones for woodwinds and strings more than brass because, well, with the brass instruments, you can get harmonics really easily. But then things like 15-tone equal temperament would be really hard.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Oh, and one more thing. Multiphonics. Some composers like to use multiphonics to generate sort of xenharmonic sounding chords or microtonal things. And if you don't know what multiphonics are, they are unorthodox ways to play an instrument with air streams so that you get things like difference tones and combination tones that you wouldn't normally get. So you can kind of play these bizarre chords with your instruments if you are just good enough at it, and they're very hard. As a saxophone player, I can like really respect and dig multiphonics. So,
yeah. I've heard some cool multiphonics. Bassoon is one that comes to mind because the instrument is so big and it's just so physical.
Yeah,
there's a lot of stuff going on inside the instrument, so you can blow raspberries into it and get all kinds of weird chords that come out. Absolutely fascinating. And it's certainly been the whole idea and concept behind whole pieces of contemporary music. Yeah, absolutely. Now that we've talked about some acoustic instruments, we can talk about synthesizers. Now, Sevish is really, really good at this, so I might let him take the wheel a little bit. I sort of, I've worked with synthesizers, but I would say I haven't looked at like every single one that's available, and not that you ever could, but no.
I like to sort of get my workflow and stick to it. So, Sevish, what do you tend to use when you're making your electronic music? I know a lot of people know you use Maximus P, but you should go into detail about that.
Yeah. Oh, well, I was using Max MSP. I don't anymore. I don't have access to it anymore. Well, I mean, I still have my license, but I don't really have a computer I can run it on. Although I did start using Pure Data, which is kind of like the free, like stupid cousin of Pure Data that's like not user friendly at all. But you can make some cool stuff with it. So I built like a microtonal sampler.
Cool.
Yeah, and I don't use it anymore because now there's like a VST instrument or similar kind of plugin that does that is available for my system. So I've been using that. Well, look, yeah, synthesizers to play xenharmonic music. I think they're one of the best instruments for exploring xenharmonic scales. As far as I know, there are no other instruments where you can push a single button and then every pitch on that instrument is suddenly, instantly, automatically tuned to your chosen scale with perfect digital accuracy.
Oh, okay.
I don't know. Can you think of anything else? There may be, but
not really.
it's just the nature of the instrument, isn't it? You can build in all these logical things because it's all electronics. So there's a bad side to this. There's a tricky side to it. Is that not all synths actually support microtuning. So you may find yourself in the position, oh, hey, I've got synths, I should be able to do it. Well, you may need to take stock of what synths you do own, find out if any of them support microtuning. So that would be reading manuals or just going on Google and doing a quick search. If you're lucky, some hardware synths support microtuning. The Yamaha DX7 does, famous synthesizer from the 80s. I tend to use software synthesizers. Because I like to do all of my work in a digital audio workstation. I'm just a kind of lazy dude. I do everything in the box. I don't really own much gear. But I love playing with computers. So
cost effective.
Yeah, they're still totally effective. I mean, the good thing about doing it this way is there are free software synths that support microtuning. So that really lowers the barrier of entry. You don't have to buy anything. If you've just got a laptop already there, then you could start messing around with it. So an example of a synth that can do that would be like Xen Ad Sub FX. It's this ancient and very, very, what's the word? Idiosyncratic, I guess, synth.
Yeah.
But it's freely available and it does full keyboard microtuning, so that's great. You've got other choices as well. There's various instruments that are produced by Xen Arts. I used those for a long time. They're Windows only, 32-bit only. I'm not using Windows anymore, so I don't have access to those. And I really miss them because for a few years they were really responsible for the sound of my music, basically. I used all of the free Xen Art synths. They're just great microtonal synths. So
yeah, they really are. They're always highly recommended. Have you used Xen Ad Sub Effects a lot? I have that on my computer, but I've been too scared to open it and mess around so far.
Yeah, I'm using it a lot more now. So I started using Linux for making music. So I am really in a niche of a niche now because there is almost no Linux users. There are almost no microtonalists. Now I'm kind of the intersection of those two things.
Yeah.
Xen Ad Sub FX is one of the instruments that is available to me. So yeah, I'm using that a lot more now. So whenever my next record comes out, I guess there's going to be a ton of Xen on that.
Oh, awesome. Yeah.
I'm still getting the hang of it. It can do some cool things. A lot of the sounds that I come up with at the moment are kind of samey. I really need to go deep into some of the other options it has. It can do all kinds of modulation synthesis as well. So there's things you can do there.
Yeah. Do you think using different kinds of synths are a good way to sort of change up your sound as an electronic musician and bring a little bit of a fresh take to all of that?
Yeah, I think so. I think it can help to have a variety. The difficult thing is there are so many options available to you,
right?
That you need to commit to a unified vision of that song. So you could have a sound A that sounds really, really great by itself. Oh yeah, I love that sound. I'm going to use that in a track.
Yeah.
And sound B, which is like this big sound, and I want to use that with blah, blah, blah. You combine them together, and they're conflicting with each other. They're fighting. You get a better result if you. To be honest, this applies to orchestrating, classical music and things like that as well.
Oh yeah, all the time.
Yeah, you need to combine certain things in a complementary way. So yeah, it can help to have more than one. But certain powerhouse synthesizers like Xen Ad Sub FX, a few others, you could just survive with just that if you had this skill in sound design. You could get away with just one, I think.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I basically use just one right now. I'm using Native Instruments Absynth, which I know is like the most mainstream one, but it's really, really good. And it does take different tuning files. You just have to convert it to a .gly and then put it in the libraries folder.
Okay.
Or you can actually, if you don't want to do all of that, there's also a trick that I have on my YouTube channel where you change the octave length to 1, and then you change the step size to 12 divided by the equal temperament you're using. So that can be really easy. But you should also visit Sevish's website about that if you want certain Scala files, but you don't want to download Scala, Can you explain that website a little bit, because you showed it to me and Scala wasn't working for me because it had something called a new line error.
What website was? Oh, you're talking about Scale Workshop.
Yeah, Scala Workshop. Yeah. That place is great. Yeah.
All right.
I definitely recommend you use that if you're trying to get certain tuning files to your synthesizers and you don't want to download Scala or some other thing. So can you explain how that works?
Yeah, I'll explain that. I guess I'll have to explain a little bit of the background as well. So you mentioned tuning files.
Yes.
Obviously, a microtuning, we can express that as data. That could be frequencies in hertz. That could be intervals measured in cents. And this data can be put into a tuning file. And many synthesizers support the various formats of tuning file. You've got Scala files. You've got Anomark tune files.
Yes.
You've got MIDI tuning dumps. There's various things, loads of them. It's a whole wild west out there. There's no standardization in microtonality. It's very much do your own thing. Well, anyway, if you do have one of these synths that can support this, then you could just go online and start generating these tuning files for yourselves. So this is what Stephen's talking about, Scale Workshop. It's a project that kind of came about because we had a software called Scala or Scala, whatever.
Yeah.
I call it Scala.
Oh, right, yeah.
But you can specify your own microtunings, you can hear them, and then you can export them for in the various tuning formats so that you could then use that in your synth. However, there's all kinds of problems with that. You have to download some other software. You have to install a bunch of things. Or if you're on Mac OS, you have to do all kinds of steps. I'm not even sure, but it's quite an involved process, right, of getting Scala running on a Mac.
Yeah, I got it running on my Mac, and there were a lot of directions for like how to make it be compatible, and I think I followed those, but there are like a lot of avenues you can take with making sure it's installed correctly, and I'm pretty sure like I missed some other step. So it's kind of like a weird thing to install because it also wants to use something called Xquartz on my computer. So it's like Xquartz will open and then Scala opens, but it's like this separate window that looks like it goes forward to the program, but it's actually a quit knob. So you don't want to press it and you want to wait a little while for Scala to pop up. So it's very weird on my Mac, but on my PC, which is a dinosaur, I can use it a lot better there, but I don't use my PC for much else, except for Joe Manza's Tonescape, which I find is pretty fun for lattice making, but it's so old and, it's not for Mac, so...
Yeah. So what we're getting at here really is Scala is this awesome software we basically need it to tune up certain instruments,
right?
But it's difficult to install. So as much as we all love it, and I still use it, I started developing a tool that runs in a web browser that would be easy for someone on any platform, even if you're on a smartphone, to start making scales.
Yeah.
You can specify your scales. You can generate equal temperaments, generate rank 2 temperaments, harmonic series scales, things like that.
Or you can type in your own numbers, right? So even if you want to do, yeah.
Or you can import a Scala file. So, and there are packs online, there are zip files online that have got thousands of Scala files inside. So you can do all that kind of stuff. Then it will let you export them for the various synths. And also, we've got MIDI support now. So
that's awesome.
If you've got a MIDI keyboard, you can plug that and you'll hear the sound out of your web browser, and it will actually be that authentic microtuning that you're working on.
Wow. So when did that happen? I totally didn't know that was the thing. So I need to start telling people because, it's so little work to literally type something in. I think when non-computer people are told like, hey, download this software and mess with it, they're like, ooh, software, I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
It's like, they feel like they're investing their time, but if you pull up something in a web browser, people are, I think, a lot more friendly about it if they don't like computers. So I guess I'll be telling people to do that. That's so awesome. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is a really good way of getting people to hear whatever scales you're working on as well, because if you create a scale with that software, in the export menu, there's a share scale via URL.
Yes.
And you can copy that URL and paste it to someone. That will open up the software on their side with your scale inside it, and then they can play it and hear it straight away. So yeah, that's quite software like that, or like Scala, or like so Toolkite is another microtonalist. He has alt tuner for
Yes,
Reaper.
yes.
Is that right? Which is a super powerful microtuning utility software. These things, they all do the same thing. Sorry, I'll let you speak in a minute. These tools, they all pretty much do the same thing of retuning synths. Getting access to those is the gateway to microtonal electronic music, I think.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'll let you go on now.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I was just going to mention that alt tuner does a lot of the things that people first think of. Like, alt tuner will retune just intonation on the fly.
Oh, yeah.
Sort of like temperament, but with the actual correct pitches.
Yeah.
Which is very interesting, I think. And it does a lot of stuff with, like, lattices and notation as well. So, different kinds of software do different kinds of things, for sure. And it's amazing how precise things have to be. Like, in Max MSP, I remember I forgot to make float numbers once, and I made them integers, and the just intonation was messed up. I could hear it. So, hertz within the decimal place really matters.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's definitely important that you investigate some of this if you're interested in auditioning the sounds. I think there was one more software I wanted to mention. Oh, Pianoteq. Pianoteq is that's a good software for making pretty realistic sounding piano music if you want to use different tunings. It has a distinctive sound such that you can tell that it's Pianoteq, but it sounds really good because it's super hard to make piano synths because of their complex frequency content.
Yeah, I quite like the sound of Pianoteq. It's very cool.
Me too.
And it's been a supporter of microtonal scales for quite a long time now. So
good for them.
Yeah, good for them. Good for all of us that we have access to something like that as well. It's just so cool.
Yeah. One more thing that I want to mention that's not really like an instrument thing, but Dorico, which is a new music notation software, is really serious about getting microtonal notation and playback. And I'm very excited about that as a Finale user. Basically, in Finale, you can either put in accidentals as expression tools, which is really cumbersome and bad because of the layout updating, or you can customize your own accidentals, but then they won't really play back.
Yeah.
Which is probably the preferred method. But something with playback and microtonal accidentals that you can make yourself is truly an extraordinary achievement. So I'll definitely be looking into buying Dorico sometime in the next few months.
Yeah, I have so much respect that they went and did this. It's obviously a very niche topic we're working with, microtonality, and there's no guarantee if you invest all that time in developing some software with powerful microtonal features that is going to translate into money in the bank.
Right.
And that's what it comes down to, really, doesn't it? Because
it's
an enterprise. So yeah, I've got so much respect they did this. We have a chicken and an egg problem. We don't have the tools to make microtonal composition and performance accessible to the masses, and the masses are unaware of it because there's not enough content that's microtonal because there's not enough tools. Yeah, we're back to square one. So it's this whole cycle. So any time that developers actually make the effort to support this stuff, I'm so happy to see that.
Yeah, me too.
Dorico, I don't notate things myself. I can scarcely read notation. It's funny watching me try, but
there you go.
I'd like to give it a try sometime. I'll give it a try.
Yeah. Speaking of notation, we are actually going to talk about tunings that are easy for beginners. And usually in my book, that also means that they're easy to notate, but it might not mean that for you, since you tend to not notate. I notate if I feel like my work is contrapuntal in some way that it merits notation. If it's something that could be expressed as a lead sheet, and I'm not really paying that much attention to voicing, orchestration, or other details, then I tend to try and make a lead sheet of it somehow. But there are certain tunings that do that better than others.
Right.
So do you want to share your 5 tunings first? Because I've got 5, and then you've probably got 5.
I came up with 4, and for the last one, I'm just going to pick a random one.
That sounds good.
But yeah, what we can do is we can take it in turns.
Okay.
If you like, we do it that way. So what do you want me to go first then?
Sure. So I guess these were are these in order? Are these both our number one tuning? I guess.
For me, this is in no particular order. I've picked a few different beginners microtunings for various different reasons. So I'm just going to go with one. You know what I'm going to start with? For me, the quintessential beginner's tuning. Probably a very obvious one, right? Probably a very, very obvious one.
I think I know what you're going to say, yeah.
Because it's so easy to play pretty music with it. Carl, guess what do you think the tuning is?
I think you're going to say 19 equal.
No, not 19 equal, actually. I was going to go with 5 equal.
Oh, 5? Oh, yeah.
Yeah, 5 equal. Oh,
that's a good choice, yeah.
It's a pentatonic scale, but every single interval is the same size. They're all equal. Well, the steps are all equal sizes. Obviously, being a pentatonic, like children could play it. You could build a toy instrument, a toy marimba in this tuning. It would just sound great. You would very quickly.
And it'd be more cost effective.
It would be. I wish that children's instruments were made in 5-Edo. They're usually some arbitrary tuning because it's very cheaply made stuff and they don't actually tune the bars. But I would love to see more of this. I mean, it's quite limited because it is just a pentatonic, but it's very xenharmonic at the same time. You know, that step size is 240 cents. There's nothing quite like that in the familiar Western tuning. Fourths and fifths are somewhat out of tune, but they actually sound really nice, kind of shimmering kind of feel to them. You end up with, I'm not sure exactly what intervals become the same, but is it the third and the fourth are pretty much the same interval? Or would you say the second and third become the same category?
Well, since 5 is really, really small, there are a lot of intervals that become the same. I would say that in 5 equal, the minor third and the major second sort of take on the same role with that 240 cent interval. At least one of the most xenharmonic features about it is that the distance between the perfect fourth and the perfect fifth from the root can sound like a minor third if you do it right.
Yeah, so it's a good beginner's one because you do have access to that kind of trippy thing. The categories are totally different than what you would get, but otherwise it's very easy. I think, 5-Edo is quite limited. You will quickly exhaust the possibilities, but by that point, you've already figured out how to get your instrument tuned up to 5-Edo. Next time you can be a lot more courageous.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I feel like 5 would be hard to tune in terms of JI, but really easy to tune in terms of equal step sizes. You just would have to be used to non-12 tunings to get a feel for, it being the same size in between notes. And you would have to be really careful that you weren't, say, tuning a perfect fourth and a perfect fifth like 12 equal, and then just having the interval that splits the fourth in both of those other slots.
Yeah.
Because then that would be more like something from quarter tones. You want it to actually be an equal 5 steps.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad that you picked that because I probably didn't pick anything like what you picked.
Cool.
So yeah, okay. I guess I can say one now. Quarter tones, or 24-tone equal temperament, is a really good choice because, of course, most people are trained in 12-tone equal temperament in the Western musical world, and quarter tones is just this logical step where you can take another instrument in 12-tone equal temperament and just shift it by a quarter tone, and then you are, quote-unquote, in the cracks.
Yeah.
So that is why so many composers have written in quarter tones, because it's a really, really easy way to get microtones. So I highly recommend you use quarter tones. The reason I don't use them as much as I could is because I know that, they'll be kind of the first thing that a lot of composers will jump to. So I just want to use tunings that haven't been used before for the new sounds.
Right, so you think that quarter tones are perhaps too obvious of a choice?
Well, I mean, it depends on what you're going for. If you want to make a practical decision where performers will actually play your music, but you also want really small steps, then quarter tones are a great choice, because all contemporary performers worth their salt nowadays are very proficient in quarter tones.
Okay.
Just as proficient as they are in 12-tone equal temperament.
Right, so yeah. You would say they're even familiar with quarter tones and wouldn't mind you giving them something to play that had quarter tones all over it.
Yeah, they don't mind at all. And some of them even are willing to get more advanced and down in the nitty-gritty with other microtonal tunings. But yeah, quarter tones are really standard fare, and I don't think they're new to contemporary performers. At least all the performers I'm worked with, like Ice, Fifth House Ensemble, Bayo String Quartet, things like that, they are all just fine with playing quarter tones.
Yeah.
Although quarter tones are weird because, in music theory, you learn about how 12-tone equal temperament is related to itself, and you never, they don't teach, quarter tone theory in class, so people don't know off the top of their head, what, B half flat minor lit would be, but, the quarter tones are there and usually used to enhance a 12-like mindset with these different inflections. And there are some composers also that are fine with the quarter tones being used for non-24 equal inflections. This is a common thing in macabre music where the notation doesn't exactly relate to exact 24 EDO. And I was reading 6 composers on non-standard tunings, a little interview that Easily Blackwood and some other composers did, I think John Eaton, Joel Mandelbaum, and I think it was John Eaton that said that when he notates quarter tones, they don't have to be straight 24 EDO, and he prefers that the performers sort of add their own inflections.
Okay.
So, yeah, that's why quarter tones are a really good choice if you want people to actually play your music and if you want those smaller steps.
Yeah.
Although, of course, you can get smaller than 50 cents, but at least for me, 35 cents is a cutoff where I tend to hear a step that's lower than 35 cents as a retuning of a note instead of a different note.
Yeah. I think I would agree on that. But when I listen to a lot of microtonal music that uses those small steps, they can actually make a lot of sense. Oh, God, yeah. I don't know how I'm going to explain this. It all feels very intuitive to me, but sometimes there will be a melody, and in my mind's ear, I can really hear. So, for example, they play 2 notes, one after the other, the same. But in my mind's ear, I can hear, because of the other chord changes and things happening in the background, that for that second note, which should be the same one, a tiny little shift would actually work really, really well.
Yeah.
Sorry, this is all totally unrelated to the topic of 5 beginner microtunings, but yeah. We like those small, good. tiny little steps.
Oh yeah, the tiny steps are nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're perhaps less beginner friendly, but quarter tones we reckon are quite beginner friendly. Yeah. I was thinking of putting this one on my list as well, actually, but I'm glad that you brought this up.
Oh, cool. So what's your second one then?
Yeah, let's go for my second one. Let's go for 17 Edo.
Yeah, that was one of mine.
That was one of yours as well, right? Okay, so
there we go.
That's cool. So we can both say a little part about this. So I think this is going to be a good beginner's tuning for someone with just a little more courage than the 5 Edo Explorer. So I mean, the first standout feature of this tuning for me is because it has more notes than 12. Instantly, there are going to be more options. But unlike something such as quarter tone scale, which is actually just 2 interlocking chains of 12 equal, right?
Right. Yeah.
17 is just different. Because it shares no intervals in common with 12. It can share the intervals, but not the exact tuning of them, except for the octave.
Yeah.
Right.
To be clear, we're talking about 17-tone equal temperament. And generally when we say, just an integer like that, that's sort of what we mean is we're talking about an equal temperament. So, yeah. Yeah, 17 is good for Middle Eastern sounding music.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a little bit unusual because the diatonic semitone is actually smaller than the chromatic semitone.
Right.
So the roles are flipped, yeah.
So is that why you get sharps that are flatter than flats, or no, not the other way around? When you know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah,
when you notate it, the order of notes by their pitch, actually you swap between. Could you explain that better? Because I think I just made a total mess of that.
Oh, sure. Yeah, no, you've got the right idea. In fact, at the Xen Harmonic New Music Showcase, I sang Aaron Johnson's Alleluia piece in 17-tone equal temperament a cappella with 2 singers who hadn't worked with it before. So that's a real testament to how easy it can be if you are thinking of singing perfect fifths. 17-tone equal temperament is like 12-tone equal temperament, where its perfect fifths are really close to in tune. So it has a structure where if you keep stacking the perfect fifths, you get things that are kind of like a diatonic scale. But But the tuning of 17 equals diatonic scale is such that the major chords are quite out of tune with just intonation, or at least traditional just intonation in the 5 limit is what we would call it. 17 is also notated in that way, diatonically. But then the black keys are split enharmonically, and the flat goes on the bottom instead of the top. So if I were to spell all of the notes of 17 equal using the simplest note names, I could say, C, D flat, C sharp, D, E flat, D sharp, E, F, G flat, F sharp, G, A flat, G sharp, A, B flat, A sharp, B. And then those would be all 17 of the notes.
Yeah.
You can also say that the sharped and flatted notes, if you want to use half flats or half sharps, that's also a good strategy. And you can make those enharmonic to certain notes. So like if I wanted to spell it where the letters sort of went in order like we're used to thinking about, it would be like C, C half sharp, D half flat, D. You can understand there that C half sharp is the same as D flat, and D half flat is the same as C sharp. Sorry.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's how that's notated, and that's the music we were reading in Aaron Johnson's piece that we performed.
Yeah. I mean, well, I think you've said this, but one of the things that just really strikes me as amazing about this tuning is how intuitive it is.
Yes.
I mean, I've only used it a small amount of times, maybe written 1 or 2 tracks in it, but when I have, it has made a lot of sense when I've written it, and then to hear that played back, I very quickly got a feel for, okay, I want this kind of jump to happen in the melody. I kind of got a feel very quickly for how many steps away that was to reach the interval that I wanted to land at. That in many
intuitive.
tunings you'd have a hard time with that. I have a hard time with that in 31, probably because the steps are so small. I always find it difficult to find how many steps away things are. But for 17, it was just really, really simple. So I really want to return to it, and it's fairly xenharmonic as well. I mean, like you said, the major thirds would be considered quite out of tune from a 5 limit JI standpoint.
Yes,
you get those nice middle thirds as well, those nice neutral thirds. Sorry.
The bad major third can also be disguised, like anything can be if you use the right timbre. But I know that in Easley Blackwood's 17 equal etude from the 12 microtonal etudes for electronic music media, he uses that bad major third, but in the voicing, he makes the home chord like a minor 7th, so that it sort of disguises that.
Right.
And I don't really hear it as being offensive in that etude, so I think he did a good job with it. And you can too if you want to use, chords with 4 notes to disguise that in 17.
Yeah.
Or just open fifths. Those are really good ways to go if you don't want people to think it's out of tune.
Awesome. Okay. Well, turn? It's your turn. Sorry, I stole one of your choices there.
No, that's good. That means we can get through things quickly and, part of the surprise. Okay, so the next one I've got is 19 equal.
Okay.
I don't know if that was one of yours. 19 equal is maybe the semitone isn't as melodically singable as 17's. 17 has a nice semitone that's about 70 cents. Or at least a nice diatonic semitone at about 70 cents. 19 reverses the trade-off you get in 17. In 17, you have a more melodically singable diatonic scale, but the major and minor thirds are very out of tune with 5 limit JI. And in 19 tone equal temperament, the thirds are much more in tune with 5 limit JI, but it's not as singable.
Right.
The chromatic semitone at 19 is like 65 something cents.
Mm-hmm.
And then the diatonic semitone being larger is like 116 something. I don't quite remember the numbers, but it's a little bit harder to differentiate between the diatonic and chromatic semitones in 19 tone equal temperament. But it can also be notated like 17, except even more easily. You don't need any half sharps or half flats at all. 19 is what's called a mean tone temperament, like 12 tone equal temperament, meaning that stacking 4 perfect fifths on top of each other is the same as getting a major third. So that's not true in 17. if you try that in 17, you'll get the third that's in between. No. If you try that in 17, you'll get different notes. So that's why 19 works out so well. You can still notate major and minor chords just as you would in 12. It's just that the chromatic relationships are different. The diatonic relationships are the same. Do you use 19 equal that much?
I've used it a handful of times, yeah. Slightly more than I've used 17. Yeah.
Yeah, that's good stuff. Yeah, it's I'd say it's pretty easy to work with because you can just send out lead sheet like you would in 12, and you just have to make that difference between the diatonic and chromatic semitone. So I have a 19 equal guitar that I use. I'm working on a 19 equal marimba, and I actually want my kalimba to be in 19 as well.
Okay.
So that most of my like little homemade instruments that get put together are in 19, so they can play together. So there you go.
Yeah, cool. So this idea of 19 being a mean tone temperament, could you take just any piece of music in, say, 12 Edo and play that in 19?
Well, you could, of course, do that, but whether it would sound the same is a different question. I think it depends on where the chords cycle to and where the destination ends up being, as with any xenharmonics. So probably the less the music travels out of key, the easier time you would have with that. Like, you could take most pop songs and convert them to 19, and they would probably sound nearly the same, unless there was a real chromatic relationship going on. Like, maybe if, somebody uses D flat and then A, like from bar to bar, you might hear the shift from D flat to C sharp.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. But if someone was just diatonic in D flat major, say, you just noticed that the leading tone was a little flatter and the thirds were a little better and the fifth was slightly flat, things like that.
Yeah.
So, yeah. There's lots of good examples of songs that don't work as well in 19 tone equal temperament, but I can't really think of any concrete examples right now. I think one time I tried to play Proud Mary in 19 tone equal temperament and it sounded really weird because the beginning of that, it's just planing major chords that are chromatic with each other.
Mm-hmm.
So 19 makes it sound a little bit funky.
Yeah.
I also know that there are musicians that play like blues in 19 tone equal temperament. Neil Haverstick's a great example.
Mm-hmm.
He's got a 19 tone guitar, and so he will do this thing where like there are extra notes in between the spots that they normally are in 12 so that they make more bars. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah. One thing I thought you were about to say there about that 19 blues track, there's this kind of rundown, or I don't know what it's called, but this ding going down to the tonic, right? But because 19 has more steps, that changes the rhythm. He does the same chromatic movement down to where he's leading to, but has to add like an extra beat, or I don't know exactly how many beats he has to add, but has to add a little bit more time in there to account for these extra notes. It's cool that the microtuning, when used in like an idiomatic context, could have these other results.
That's very cool. Yeah. So 19 is pretty good. All right. What's your next tuning?
Okay. Well, I will kind of follow the theme of what you just said. My next suggestion would be a subset of 31 Edo.
Ooh.
But 12 notes.
Smart.
Yeah, 12. So basically 12 out of 31 Edo. Basically a 12-note chromatic scale, as it were, but the semitones are not going to be totally equal like they are in 12. I like this idea because, well, 31 Edo has some great properties, but having 12 notes out of that means you can really easily map that to, say, a MIDI keyboard.
Yeah.
And keep the same fingerings, keep all of the same muscle memory that you've developed. And you basically you get some familiar sounds with the tuning, and you get certain keys that will sound more in tune than others. But you will also get access to a few 7-limit intervals this way. And I think budding microtonalists need to get into their 7-limit because there's some really, really tasty intervals there.
Yeah. I remember the first time I really recognized 7-limit just intonation, I was just blown away. And I've been able to recognize it ever since. It's got a pretty distinctive sound.
Very distinctive, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. It's also worth noting that just like in 19, that could be notated exactly as it would in 12. It's just that you would have to make the differences between certain enharmonic notes.
Yeah.
So just like in olden Baroque times, let's say you wanted to go from, E flat major to A major approximately. You couldn't play a G sharp as A flat. Those wouldn't be the same note anymore.
Right.
Yeah, so like if you wanted to play, E major, and you had an A flat instead of a G sharp, it would sound out of tune because it's going the wrong way.
Yeah, right.
Around the circle. So, yeah, that's a pretty common idea. So, yeah, good music to be made with that. My next one is actually not a mean tone temperament. 15 equal.
Yeah, that's not a mean tone temperament. That's another beast entirely, right?
Right. Now, of course, I say this is a beginner tuning because my last two picks here sort of revolve around using something from equal heptatonic and equal pentatonic notations. So those are sort of the most important sounds you miss out on in 12-tone equal temperament. You miss out on what an equally pentatonic scale sounds like, as Sevish explained with 5 EDO, and then you miss out on an equal heptatonic scale, 7 EDO. A lot of times when an equal heptatonic scale is played, if you pick 5 notes to use as a pentatonic scale, that's very commonly done in some cultures. So 5 EDO is the reason that I picked 15 here. 15 allows you to create major and minor chords, and in my opinion, it's quite easy to notate if you understand how a 5-tone equal tempered circle of fifths works. So then you can notate major and minor chords and give lead sheet like anything. It's just that it's very, very melodically bizarre, and it lacks a whole step. So It forces you into new territory. Kind of like what people say about 22-tone equal temperament.
Oh, yes.
Except I think, 15 and 22 are both xenharmonic in really different ways. Probably 22 has much more of an opportunity to mimic music you've already heard, but also doesn't work with common practice period harmony.
No, not at all.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, I definitely recommend 15 because it has a very small amount of notes, so it's really reasonable, and xenharmonic composers can use it for that because, there's not that much new material to learn there. It's not like a tuning with a lot of notes where you have to be really precise or make differentiations between notes that are really close together.
Yeah. Would you say that you use 5 EDO as almost like the natural scale of 15? Almost like
the basis of my chord structures, or
because let's say like that.
Because I know I listened to that song that you did in Blackwood 10, and I was like, oh, I didn't know he had done something in that. 15 equal has this really, really incredible scale in it called Blackwood 10. It's very similar to a hexatonic scale in 12 equal or an octatonic scale in 12 equal.
Yep.
Where you divide the equal temperament by a certain divisible amount, and then you have half steps just coming up from each note. So, like, if I divide 12-tone equal temperament into 3, I get this augmented chord, and then if I want each note to just rise by a half step and connect that to the scale, let's say I spell it like C, E, G sharp, and then add D flat, F, A. And, now I've got this hexatonic scale. Similarly, in the octatonic scale, I can have C, E flat, F sharp, A. There's a fully diminished 7th chord, so we're dividing it by, 3 into 4 parts, and then we just chunk that up. So I could spell that, C, C sharp, E flat, E, F sharp, G, A, B flat, C. And then in 15, we have a thing where we can divide it 5 ways and just chunk that 5 EDO up a half step.
Yep.
But this scale creates major chords that have extremely interesting relationships with one another that are exclusively sort of found in 15-tone equal temperament as a small equal temperament, and they can either mimic the progressions we've already heard or sound completely new.
Yeah.
Because, as we talked about in 5-tone equal temperament, we can have a perfect 4th or a perfect 5th from our original note. So that means in Blackwood 10, we can have sort of like a 4 chord and a 5 chord, respectively, but they sound out of kilter with the other notes compared to what you're normally used to. So function, I think, is very, very interesting in that scale. And, of course, it's named after Easley Blackwood, who loved 15-tone equal temperament a lot, so he tended to use it in his compositions.
Yeah, there's also a really interesting little essay you can read about this whole idea of Blackwood temperament.
Yes.
And I believe it's called, is it called Five is Not an Odd Number? Something like that, right?
I think so. Are you talking about the thing
I'm talking
that...
about Igliation Jones, yeah.
Yes, of course. Yeah, that's a fun one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's when I first, reading that essay, I think, was my first time really understanding, 15 Edo can do that. Very cool.
Yeah.
As you go up the scale, you can form triads on any of those notes, and it will be either a major or a minor triad, and it will alternate major, minor, major, minor, major, and you will never reach a diminished chord or something like that, like you would do in 12, let's say.
Right.
So you can use that to, if you approach that in certain ways, you could establish any of those 10 notes as your tonic.
Yes, it's extremely interesting how that can be done and how much there is to be discovered there. I mean, I promise that if you haven't done anything xenharmonic yet and you try 15, you will not be disappointed if you're searching for something that sounds really xenharmonic. So yeah, I ear train with it too, using Max MSP. I need to work out how to like notate it on the computer though. I'll generate random exercises for myself and try and sing along in 15 tone equal temperament. And I'd say I used to get it about like 40% of the time, and now it's more like 85. So
cool.
Yeah, it's a good tuning. How about you? What's your next one?
Yeah, I'm going to go for my next one, which is slightly more general, but I'm going to say for this one is harmonic series segments. So.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Good one.
The do we start by explaining the harmonic series? I mean, should we go that far?
That's a good question. Maybe we could give a brief overview. So, probably as a Western musician, there was one time in class where the overtone series was brought up, or maybe you've heard a tell of it. Usually what happens is they bring out this diagram, of course from C, showing all of the harmonics that come from that note. So a harmonic just has to do with a theoretical vibrating string, and then the fact that that vibrating string has different modes. So if you hold down the node at the halfway point, you'll get 2 vibrating sections that now vibrate twice as much. So then that is your octave. And then if you were to divide that string into 3 sections, you would get a tritave, or an octave in a perfect fifth. And you can keep going. And these harmonics form a major chord when you get to the 5th harmonic. When you get to the 7th harmonic, you start entering xenharmonic territory. So the harmonic series is a good building block for understanding how a major chord is sort of naturally contained in a harmonic sound, and octave reducing those harmonic series intervals and thinking about them in terms of how they blend is what people are usually doing when they talk about just intonation. So that's kind of the situation there. Usually the aforementioned like core classes in question never go farther than just explaining what the overtone series is. But you can actually do the fractional math and octave reduce that and sort of memorize a lot of the intervals. Like, for example, I think almost every microtonalist knows that 5/4 is the frequency ratio for a just major third, because it comes from 5/1 in the harmonic series being a major third that's really high, or a few octaves up. So that fits with how music theory people like to put everything in one octave in a state of octave equivalence. So that's really what we're working with this time. So Sevish, how would you use those harmonic series fragments in a beginner-friendly way?
Well, in a beginner-friendly way, you would just download the tuning file and just click the button, and then you would just start pressing random notes. Is kind of, but this is my approach to most things. So of course I would say that.
There you go.
But yeah, I would take something like the harmonics from say 8 through to 16.
Right.
Because between 8 and 16 themselves have a 2-to-1 ratio. So the harmonics between 8 and 16 would span 1 octave.
Also, the adjacent steps, like in that scale, would sort of be stepwise, right? As well? So that's another reason that it makes a good scale. It kind of fills out the octave.
I mean, when we talk about the
nicely.
harmonic series, it's mainly known through the overtone series. As you know, it's something that's baked into the timbre of harmonic kind of sounds themselves, like vibrating strings, vibrating vocal chords, whatever it is.
Yes.
The idea of then taking that and applying it to your scale can work quite well when you're using that kind of timbre. A synthesizer, a sawtooth wave, a violin string, something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Sawtooth waves especially.
Yeah, sawtooth waves are almost designed for that kind of thing. I mean, something that I'd like to talk about another day maybe is how that's almost too perfect and can sound totally jarring. But particularly on acoustic instruments, just intonation and harmonic series segments, or just playing a straight harmonic series, can sound really, really, really nice. You know, the imperfections, the physicality of those instruments lend themselves to just intonation, whereas the raw digital purity of like a digital synth can push that JI purity into overdrive, and things start sounding like robot beeps, and it's not a good thing.
Right, or the melodies or the notes that are tuned in just intonation can lose their sense of independence. So it can be bad for counterpoint.
Yeah, absolutely. If you're working with acoustic instruments, trying to tune some of your notes to members of the harmonic series could work really well.
Yeah, it's a lot easier to do that by ear than to tune with equal temperament, which requires, in many cases, sort of like a calculated method by which you have to use just intonation to get around something.
Yeah.
Which is what piano tuners do. Yeah. Cool. Well, I think that's a really good choice. I was going to pick something just intonation, but since I knew you were picking some, I thought I would leave that to you because I tend to really like equal temperaments because, you know, as we've just discovered, you have to explain it a little bit less. Even though people kind of get what the overtone series is, I think it's hard to get musicians into JI, or at least a little bit harder to get them into it.
It's all very abstract, isn't it? Everything is connected to some fundamental
yes, it is.
that may not even be heard, may be really, really, really low, that fundamental, like infrasonic kind of frequency that just mathematically relates to everything else. Yeah, it feels very abstract, but the idea of, oh, hey, imagine an octave. Okay, now imagine equally dividing that. It's kind of a bit easier, I feel. And I think the other reason that we tend to get a bit obsessed about equal temperaments is because all you need to do is change that little number that's at the beginning, and you get a scale with totally different properties. They're almost like little they're little worlds of their own, really.
Yes, absolutely. That's a really good reason. I'd sort of think of it like that because when I use my synthesizers, I sort of dread like not using an equal temperament because I have to like use a Scala file or whatever. But now that we have your website, I no longer dread it anymore. So
I'll need to keep working on that. And almost nobody knows about that website. It's almost like our little secret right now. But at some point, we'll have to. We're getting the word out now.
We're getting the word out. Use that website. Yeah. All right. Cool. Let's see. Do I have one more? Okay, we both have one more. I think I have one and then you have one. So my last one, since I picked all equal temperaments, my last one is 21 equal.
Okay.
Because that will get you a 7N, and it's quite xenharmonic, like 15. 15 and 21 both are very, very interesting because they give you recognizable major and minor chords, but they are not as... I guess they're not as praised by regular temperament theorists, if that's the right term. I mean, you always hear people mention things like 17 and 19 and 22, 31. Those are kind of the big ones that everybody gravitates towards. But 15 and 21 are really xenharmonic. So that's why I like to use them. I did write a piece in 21 tone equal temperament that got into Seamus.
Oh, cool.
And the Electroacoustic Barn Dance 2018. So I think people really liked that. I used a scale that I don't think anybody else had used before with 3 step sizes that could imitate the diatonic scale really well. But yeah, it's just very... I think unlike 15, it has more of a tendency to sound melodically flat when you travel to certain notes. 15 tends to sound melodically sharp with its traveling.
You know, it's really interesting you mention this. It's almost like there's a trade-off between how good the melody is and how good the harmony is.
Yeah,
and if,
yeah.
A tuning is really good melodically, the harmony can sound terrible.
Yeah, sometimes. It depends on the temperament you're using. With mean tone temperament, that's definitely a thing. And I think with a lot of other ones, that's also true as well. I mean, when I think of something that's better melodically, I think of something where the steps are differentiated enough so that I can easily hear the difference between them. And so they have clarity of function. So, yeah, that's, of course, a different step size for each configuration or each different mode that you would have.
Yeah.
So,
Look, you picked 21. This is actually quite interesting. My last one was going to be 7.
Oh, wow,
So
yeah. That's
I think
cool.
I think we could talk a little bit about 7 Edo and how that relates to 21. So
let's
do it. Well, when I mentioned 5 Edo earlier on, I said it was like a pentatonic scale where every step was the same size, so they're all totally equal. I guess you could conceptualize 7 Edo quite similarly. It's a 7-note scale, but they're all totally equal. How that actually sounds is, well, it does sound quite a bit more out of tune, I would say.
Yeah, it's harder than 5 equal is, I think.
Right, definitely.
Although Easley Blackwood would disagree.
Oh, did he? Ah.
Yeah. He thought, well, I've poured over all of his writings, and he thought that one of the most xenharmonic sounds you can have is the interval that splits a perfect fourth in half.
Right.
So that's why he used it a lot in 19 equal.
Yeah.
And 15 equal. So, yeah, that's pretty interesting stuff. I can say that since I do a lot of notating, I much prefer notating things from a 5 equal perspective than a 7 equal perspective.
Yeah.
That's usually the strategy with these kinds of tunings. Like in 20-tone equal temperament, you could also take a chain of 5-tone equal temperament and just, chunk it out 4 times.
Right.
As opposed to 15 where it's done 3 times. And then in 21, you take a 7 equal chain, but the thirds are neither major nor minor in that chain.
Yeah.
If you think of C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, what if the steps between all of those notes that I just named were equally sized? Well, then that's 7-tone equal temperament. So it can kind of sound like a whole tone scale. It has sort of this bland neutral quality if you're using all the notes in a relatively well-distributed manner like you would a diatonic scale and not a pentatonic scale. So yeah, that's why I prefer to use 5N notations, as I call them, instead of 7N notations, because you get these weird thirds with the 7N, and you don't know if it's major or minor. It's what I find so confounding about notating 14-tone equal temperament, for example. So
Yeah.
yeah.
So, I mean, I've written
yeah,
music in 7, I've written music in 14. I did experiment with 21 once.
Yeah.
I believe I was trying to do a kind of a Blackwood, but using 7 equal as the basis rather than 5 equal. And I think other people have tried this before. I think it might even be called Whitewood. I think that.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say. It's Whitewood,
Right,
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't get my head around that. I was kind of just trying to figure things out for myself. I do want to return to the idea. Do you have any comments about Whitewood? Because I really want to know if that's something worth exploring.
I actually don't think I've heard any music with it. But it's certainly like on my list of things to do in 21. So there's that. I don't think, well, let me think about it. I guess you would be able to have major chords on every scale degree except, well, you would be able to have major chords on each of the 7 equal scale degrees, assuming that we start with S. It's like SL, 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 blah, 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 7 of them. Because then if you had a neutral third, if you went up a step, you would have a major chord in 21 equal, or at least its closest major chord.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
One thing I did notice that was very different to Blackwood was, with Whitewood, on every single note you could form a neutral triad.
Yes.
But also on alternating notes you could do a major triad, and then the other alternating notes you would get a minor one. So
that's
so
exactly what I said, basically.
Pretty much. But so you kind of get two different kinds of triad that you can mess with on each step. So that was one interesting thing. I guess none of this is very beginner friendly, but
that's okay.
I can see that 21 Edo actually would be a pretty cool one to explore. You would definitely have to be brave as a beginner to jump in, because once you start going more than 12, sometimes it can be difficult to juggle the notes. Some tunings more than others, like we said, 17, it feels very intuitive, so using all of those extra notes.
Yeah.
I don't have any particular problem with 22.
Yeah. Me neither. Yeah.
I don't think that's too many. So
yeah. I mean, I figure that if people can play quarter tones, then they can go under that. So most of my pieces tend to use less than 24 notes or 24 notes. So yeah, it's pretty cool.
Cool. So those are our beginning tunings. Awesome.
There we go. Thank you for listening to the show, and hopefully you enjoyed it. If you're a microtonal musician interested in being on the show or participating in a Q&A, please contact us via social media or email us at nowandxenharmonic@gmail.com. That's with no spaces, nowandxenharmonic@gmail.com.
We're also interested in hearing listener feedback, so let us know what you thought and we will respond on the next episode.
We will be back with more discussion and music in each episode. The show's site is at nowandxen.libsyn.com, and you can also find us on Facebook at facebook.com/nowxen and Twitter at now_Xen.
In our next episode, we'll figure out what the best tuning is once and for all. You've been listening to me, Sevish. You can find me at sevish.com.
And I'm Stephen Weigel, xenharmonic composer performer, and you can find my work at stephenweigelcomposerperformer.com. That's without any spaces, capitals, or punctuation, stephenweigelcomposerperformer.com.
We're done for now, but tune in next time. We'll see you Xen.